I'm Jessica Riley, 22, and I had my future perfectly planned since I was 8 years old. Stanford University acceptance letter in hand, academic trophies lining my shelves, and parents who promised they'd been saving for my education since I was born. Until I discovered they'd emptied my college fund for my brother's gaming equipment and new car, they thought I'd just accept it and give up my dreams. They were wrong. Before I dive into how my own parents betrayed me, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about standing up for yourself when no one else will. Growing up in suburban Chicago, my life seemed perfectly ordinary from the outside. We lived in a 2-story brick house with a well-kept lawn in a neighborhood where people took pride in their holiday decorations and summer barbecues. My father, Robert, worked as an investment banker at a mid-sized firm downtown. He'd leave before dawn in pressed suits, his leather briefcase always polished, returning home just in time for dinner most nights. My mother, Diane, built her career as a real estate agent, her face smiling from bus stop benches and local newspaper ads. She prided herself on finding forever homes for families just like ours. Then there was my younger brother, Matthew, 4 years younger than me and the undisputed favorite child since the day he was born. I remember the day they brought him home from the hospital, my father beaming with pride as he said, "Jessica, meet your brother. He's going to do great things someday." Looking back, I should have recognized that statement for what it was, the beginning of a family dynamic that would eventually shatter my future. Don't get me wrong. I wasn't neglected. My achievements were acknowledged, sometimes even celebrated. But Matthew's every move was treated like a revelation. His first finger painting hung in a custom frame in the living room for years. His participation trophy from T-ball earned a permanent spot on the mantle. Meanwhile, my academic awards were neatly arranged on a bookshelf in my bedroom, visible only to me. I channeled that quiet resentment into achievement. By high school, I had a perfect 4.0 GPA. I captained the debate team, volunteered 20 hours a week at the local literacy center, and took every AP class my school offered. My bedroom walls slowly transformed from teen idol posters to Stanford, pennants and framed acceptance letters to prestigious summer programs. Stanford was my dream since 3rd grade when our teacher, Mrs. Whitman, showed us a documentary about great American universities. Something about those Spanish-style buildings and palm trees captured my imagination. That night at dinner, I announced, my plan. "I'm going to Stanford when I grow up," I declared, my fork stabbing at broccoli with determination. My parents exchanged a look across the table before my father cleared his throat. "That's a wonderful goal, sweetheart. Stanford is very expensive, but your mother and I will start saving right away." "We already have a college fund for you," my mother added, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "We'll make sure there's enough by the time you're ready." That promise sustained me through years of hard work. Every time I stayed up until midnight studying, every summer job I took shelving books at the library, every weekend I sacrificed to volunteer instead of hanging out with friends, all of it felt worth it because I had a destination and the financial support to get there. During my sophomore year of high school, when classmates started discussing college visits, I casually brought up Stanford again. "Dad, I want to visit Stanford next spring break. Could we plan a trip?" He was reading the financial section of the newspaper, but lowered it to smile at me. "Of course. Your college fund is growing nicely. By the time you're ready to enroll, we'll have what you need." My mother added, "We're so proud of how hard you're working, Jessica. You deserve Stanford." Those reassurances continued throughout high school. During college application season, my parents helped pay for my application, fees without complaint. My father even hired a professional photographer for my application headshot. When I worried about the essays, my mother took a day off work to brainstorm with me. On December 15th of my senior year, I logged into the Stanford applicant portal. With trembling hands, my mother stood behind me, hands on my shoulders. My father paced nearby, pretending to be casual but obviously anxious. The screen loaded to reveal the message. Congratulations, Jessica Riley. We are pleased to offer you admission to Stanford University's class of 2021. I screamed. My mother burst into tears. My father pumped his fist in the air like he'd just won a sporting event. Even Matthew looked up from his video game long enough to say, "Cool." That night, my parents took us all to Maggiano's, the fancy Italian restaurant we only visited for special occasions. My father ordered champagne for himself and my mother, and sparkling cider for Matthew and me. He raised his glass for a toast. To Jessica, who has worked harder than anyone I know to achieve her dreams. Stanford won't know what hit them. We couldn't be prouder. I glowed with happiness, sipping my cider and mentally calculating the days until I'd walk beneath those palm trees as an official Stanford student. My mother talked about planning a campus visit during spring break, shopping for dorm essentials, and how she'd already started researching parent weekend accommodations. Matthew sulked a bit, pushing pasta around his plate, but I was too happy to care. For once, the spotlight was firmly on me, and it felt wonderful. As dessert arrived, tiramisu with congratulations written in chocolate sauce, my father leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry about a thing, Jessica. We've got you covered. Just focus on making the most of your Stanford experience." I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? Parents are supposed to keep their promises, especially ones they've repeated for over a decade. Little did I know that as I savored that tiramisu, the foundation of my dreams was already crumbling beneath me. The first crack in my perfect future appeared on a rainy Saturday in February. I'd stayed home to work on scholarship applications while my mother took Matthew shopping for new basketball shoes. My father was supposedly catching up on work and me, his home office door closed as usual. I headed downstairs for a snack, passing by his office just as my mother returned. Through the partially open door, I heard my name and paused. "Jessica's financial aid package isn't going to cover nearly enough," my father was saying, his voice tense. "And her college fund is nowhere near what we need for Stanford." I froze, hand gripping the hallway banister. "How bad is it?" my mother asked. "We have about 30,000. Stanford will cost over 70 per year." My stomach dropped. 30,000? That wouldn't even cover half of my first year. "What about loans?" My mother's voice had that tight quality it got when she was stressed about money. "With our income, she won't qualify for much need-based aid. We'd have to co-sign massive private loans." "Can we liquidate some investments?" "Not without taking a huge hit. And with Matthew starting to look at schools, too." I must have made a sound because suddenly the conversation stopped. I considered running back upstairs but decided against it. This was my future they were discussing. I pushed the door open. "Jessica!" My father quickly minimized whatever was on his computer screen. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough," I said, crossing my arms. "What's going on with my college fund?" My parents exchanged that look again, the one that passed. Secrets between them, excluding me. "Honey, sit down." My mother patted the leather couch in the office. "Nothing's wrong exactly. We just have some financial details to work out." "You said I had a college fund. You've been saying that for years." My voice came out sharper than intended. My father sighed, rubbing his temple. "You do have a fund. It's just not as robust as we'd hoped by this point. The market hasn't performed as expected, and we've had some unexpected expenses." "What expenses? You both make good money. You just bought a new car last year." "Jessica," my mother's voice took on that warning tone. "There are many aspects of family finances you don't understand. We'll figure this out. It's just a temporary setback." "Temporary? I'm supposed to start at Stanford in 6 months." My father straightened some papers on his desk. "Have you looked into scholarships? With your grades and activities, you should qualify for something." "I've been applying for months, but most of the big ones had deadlines back in November and December. You never said I needed to worry about this." My mother reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "We'll make it work," she insisted. "Maybe you could start at community college and transfer." "Community college? Are you kidding me? I got into Stanford." "Stanford." My father's expression hardened. "Watch your tone, young lady. We're trying to help." "Help? You've been lying to me for years!" I stormed out, slamming the door behind me. In my room, I pulled out my Stanford acceptance packet, the glossy brochures suddenly seeming like cruel jokes. The estimated cost of attendance stared back at me, $74,570 per year. Even with the $15,000 merit scholarship they'd offered, I was nowhere close to being able to afford it. The next week passed in a blur of anxiety. I made an appointment with Mrs. Hargrove, our school counselor, hoping she might have solutions. "Financial aid packages can sometimes be negotiated," she told me, her office walls covered with college pennants from schools I'd never considered. "Write a letter to Stanford explaining your situation. They might be able to offer more." I spent that night crafting the most persuasive letter I could, detailing my accomplishments, my passion for Stanford, and my newly discovered financial constraints. 3 weeks later, I received a response offering an additional $5,000 per year in aid. Better, but still leaving a massive gap. My parents suggested cheaper alternatives, state schools, safety schools I'd applied to as backups, but those weren't Stanford. They hadn't been my dream for the past decade. "What about your emergency fund?" I asked one night at dinner. "Or your retirement accounts? Can't you take loans from those?" My father set down his fork. "Jessica, we're not jeopardizing our retirement for this. There are other good schools." "But you promised," my voice cracked. "For years you promised." "Plans change," my mother said quietly. "We didn't expect costs to rise so dramatically." College tuition increases had been all over the news for years. This couldn't have been a surprise to them. As April approached, the month I needed to commit to a school, I grew desperate. I stayed up late searching for last-minute scholarships, called distant relatives to ask about family education funds, even researched gap year programs that might offer stipends. My best friend Zoe listened patiently during our study sessions. "Something doesn't add up," she finally said one afternoon as we sat cross-legged on my bed surrounded by scholarship applications. "Your parents started this fund when you were 8, right? Even with modest contributions, it should have grown to more than 30,000 by now." Her words planted a seed of suspicion. That night, I found myself staring at my ceiling, turning over the inconsistencies in my mind. My parents weren't extravagant, but they weren't struggling either. My father's frequent comments about wise investments and my mother's celebrations over good sales quarters didn't align with a college fund that had somehow failed to grow. "I need to know what really happened," I whispered to myself in the darkness. Tomorrow, I decided, I would start digging. The next day, I waited until both my parents left for work and Matthew caught the bus for school. Alone in the house, I headed straight for my father's office. I knew his computer would be password protected, but he kept important documents in the filing cabinet behind his desk. I'd seen him access it many times, always careful to lock it afterward. The key, I was certain, would be in the false-bottomed drawer of his desk, where he kept other valuables. My hands trembled as I slid the drawer open and pressed the hidden latch. Inside, just as I expected, lay a small silver key. I hesitated for just a moment, the weight of what I was about to do settling over me. This was a violation of my parents' privacy, crossing a boundary I'd never dared approach before. But then I remembered the casual way they'd dismissed my dreams, the years of false promises, and I turned the key in the lock. The cabinet was meticulously organized with labeled folders. I quickly found one marked Children's Accounts and pulled it out. Inside were statements for various accounts, including one labeled Jessica College Fund. I flipped through years of statements, watching the balance rise slowly through my childhood, reaching about $45,000 by my sophomore year of high school. Then the withdrawals began. October 2018. $3,000 withdrawal. Reason noted: emergency car repair. But I remembered that month clearly. It was when Matthew received his custom gaming computer. December 2018, $2,500 withdrawal. Home repairs. That was the Christmas Matthew got his VR gaming system. The pattern continued through my junior and senior years. Small withdrawals at first, then larger ones, with vague justifications noted in my father's handwriting. By the time I reached recent statements, the account held just under $30,000, barely enough for half a year at Stanford. My hands shook with anger, but I wasn't done investigating. I dug deeper into the cabinet and found another folder labeled Matthew's Expenses. Inside were receipts for his computer equipment, sports gear, summer camps, and private coaching sessions, totaling well over $20,000 in the past 2 years alone. Then I found it, a statement for another account I'd never seen before. Matthew College Fund. Opened just last year, it already contained $15,000. While they were telling me my dreams were too expensive, they were building a safety net for my brother. I was carefully returning the folders when I spotted a dealer invoice for a car. Last summer, my parents had surprised Matthew with a used but still expensive Audi for his 18th birthday, claiming it was a great deal they couldn't pass up. The invoice showed they'd paid nearly $20,000, money that could have gone toward my education. I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, locked the cabinet, and returned the key to its hiding place. Then I went to my room, closed the door, and let the tears come. This wasn't about market performance or unexpected expenses. My parents had systematically drained my college fund to indulge my brother while lying to my face about it for years. That evening, I could barely look at them during dinner. Matthew chatted about his basketball game while my parents nodded enthusiastically. I pushed food around my plate, rehearsing confrontational speeches in my head. "Jessica, are you feeling okay?" my mother finally asked. "You've barely touched your food." "I know about the withdrawals," I said quietly, setting down my fork. The table went silent. Matthew looked confused, but my parents' expressions told me everything I needed to know. "What withdrawals?" my father asked, his voice carefully controlled. "From my college fund, the one you've been draining to buy Matthew his computer, his gaming equipment, his car." Each word felt like acid on my tongue. My father's face hardened. "You went through my private files? Don't turn this around on me. You've been lying for years. You promised that money was for Stanford." My mother reached across the table. "Jessica, we borrowed from your fund with every intention of putting it back. We just haven't been able to yet." "Borrowed? You took over $20,000. Matthew's eyes widened. "Wait, what's going on?" "Your sister is upset about some temporary financial adjustments," my father said dismissively. "Nothing for you to worry about." "Temporary?" I laughed bitterly. "I start college in 4 months. When exactly were you planning to replace it?" "We'll help you somehow," my mother insisted. "We just need to figure out the details." "While you're figuring out details, you're also building Matthew's college fund. I saw that account too." My parents exchanged guilty looks. "Matthew has different needs," my father said carefully. "He might not qualify for the same scholarships you did. We're just trying to be prepared." "Different needs? Like an Audi? Like a $3,000 gaming setup?" "That's not fair," my mother protested. "Matthew needed those things." "Needed? How exactly did he need an Audi more than I need my college education?" Matthew interrupted. "Hey, don't blame me because you chose some overpriced school." I turned to him, rage building. "This isn't about Stanford being expensive. It's about them taking money that was promised to me and giving it to you." "Matthew needed confidence boosters. my mother explained, as if that justified everything. He was struggling socially, and we wanted to help him fit in. While completely sacrificing my future? How is that fair? My father's voice turned stern. Life isn't always fair, Jessica. We'll help with loans, or you can choose a more affordable school. There are options. The conversation deteriorated from there, voices rising until my father slammed his hand on the table and declared the discussion over. I retreated to my room, where I spent the night researching student loans, calculating interest rates, and trying to find a path forward that didn't involve giving up on Stanford or bankrupting myself for life. 2 weeks passed in cold tension. My parents avoided direct conversations about college, instead leaving brochures for state schools on my bed. I continued applying for scholarships and researching financial aid appeals. Then, while using my mother's laptop to print a scholarship essay, with her permission, I noticed an email confirmation from their bank. Curiosity and suspicion drove me to click on it. My heart nearly stopped as I read the details. A transfer of $10,000 from J College to family checking dated just yesterday. They were still taking from my fund, even after being confronted. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. The next day was Saturday. I waited until everyone was home, my anger simmering just below the surface. At lunch, I placed a printed copy of the transfer confirmation on the table. Would someone like to explain this? My voice was surprisingly steady. My mother's face drained of color. My father's jaw tightened. Jessica, he began. We were going to discuss this with you. When? After you emptied the account completely? I pulled out more papers, copies I'd made of all the account statements. I also found these. Matthew's college fund now has $25,000 in it. You've transferred another $10,000 since we last talked. Matthew looked up from his phone, suddenly interested. Wait, I have a college fund? Yes, I said, not taking my eyes off my parents. They've been building it by draining mine. My father stood up. That's enough, Jessica. Financial decisions in this family are made by your mother and me. We don't answer to you. You do when it's my college fund, money that was promised to me. We needed to make adjustments, my mother said, her voice trembling. Matthew needs more support than you. You'll be fine no matter what. Those words hit me like a physical blow. What does that mean? You've always been independent, capable, she continued. You get scholarships, you find opportunities. Matthew needs more help to succeed. I turned to my brother, expecting him to look surprised. Instead, I saw something that shattered me completely. A small, satisfied smirk. You knew, I whispered. You knew they were taking my money. He shrugged, looking back at his phone. Not the details, just that they were helping me instead of wasting it all on your fancy school. Wasting it? My voice rose. It was my money. It was never your money, my father corrected. It was our money that we set aside for your education. And we've decided that some of it is better used for Matthew's future. Some of it? You've taken almost all of it. Jessica, my mother's voice took on a pleading tone. You have options. Community college for 2 years, then transfer, work while you study, take loans. While Matthew gets a free ride? How is that fair? Life isn't fair, my father repeated his earlier sentiment. This is our decision. You can either accept it and let us help you find alternatives, or you can continue this attitude and damage your relationship with this family. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. They expected me to cave, to accept their betrayal, to give up my dreams for my brother's benefit. In that moment, something broke inside me. My trust, my hope, the last vestiges of my childhood belief that my parents would always protect me. I stood up slowly. I see where I stand in this family now. Thank you for making it so clear. I walked to my room, closed the door quietly, and collapsed onto my bed. The tears came in waves, along with a crushing sense of helplessness. Everything I'd worked for, every sacrifice I'd made, none of it mattered because my parents had decided that Matthew deserved my future more than I did. I called Zoe, my voice breaking as I explained what had happened. "Come stay with us," she offered immediately. "My parents would understand." "I can't just leave," I said, though the offer was tempting. "What are you going to do?" I stared at my Stanford acceptance letter, still pinned to my bulletin board. "I don't know yet, but I'm not giving up." After we hung up, I lay on my bed watching shadows lengthen across my ceiling. My entire identity had been built around academic achievement and the dream of Stanford. Without that, who was I? What was the point of all those late nights studying, all those weekends volunteering instead of socializing? As darkness fell, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't just about college anymore. It was about justice, about standing up for myself when no one else would. If my parents wouldn't honor their promises, I needed to find another way. I sat up, dried my tears, and reached for my laptop. If my family wouldn't fight for my future, I would do it myself. I spent the entire night researching. Not just scholarships and loans, I'd already exhausted those options, but the specific policies at Stanford regarding financial aid appeals. I discovered they had a process for special circumstances, reviews, where students could request reconsideration based on changes in their financial situation. Most examples involved job loss or medical emergencies, but there was a category called unusual family circumstances that might apply to my situation. The key would be documentation, proving that the financial support I'd been promised was no longer available. By morning, I had drafted an email to Stanford's financial aid office explaining my situation in broad terms and requesting guidance on the appeal process. I was careful not to sound bitter or accusatory, focusing instead on the facts. My parents had originally committed to funding my education, but had recently informed me that most of that support was no longer available. Monday morning, I received a response from Mrs. Delgado in the financial aid office, inviting me to call her directly. Heart pounding, I made the call from the privacy of my car during lunch break at school. "These situations are challenging, but not uncommon," she told me, her voice kind but professional. "We can certainly review your aid package, but we'll need documentation." "What kind of documentation?" "Original statements showing the college fund's existence and current statements showing the reduced amount. Any written communication from your parents about the change in support. If they're refusing to provide information for your FAFSA, we have procedures for that as well." I had the account statements, but nothing in writing from my parents. They'd been careful to keep their betrayal verbal. What if I don't have written communication from them? A detailed personal statement explaining the situation would help. Also, if there's another adult familiar with your circumstances who could provide a supporting letter, a school counselor perhaps, or another relative, that gave me an idea. My father's brother, Uncle Jim, worked in finance and had always been supportive of my academic goals. He'd even sent me a Stanford sweatshirt when I was accepted. Could he help? After school, instead of going home, I drove to a coffee shop and called him. "Uncle Jim? It's Jessica. I need your advice about something important." I explained the situation as calmly as I could, though my voice cracked several times. There was a long silence when I finished. "Those funds," he finally said, his voice unusually serious. "Do you know where they originated?" I assumed from my parents' income. "Some of it, yes. But a significant portion came from your grandparents' trust." This was news to me. My paternal grandparents had passed away when I was young, but I knew they'd left some money for the family. "What kind of trust?" "An educational trust, specifically established to fund their grandchildren's college education. Your father and I were the trustees, but the money was explicitly intended for you and your cousins to attend college." My hand tightened around my phone. "So the money they've been taking..." If they've been using educational trust money for non-educational expenses, that's a problem. A legal problem. The implications dawned on me slowly. Can you help me find out more about this trust? I'll need to review the documents. Your father and I haven't discussed the trust in years. I assumed he was managing it as intended. We arranged to meet that weekend at his office, where he'd have access to the legal documents. In the meantime, I continued my financial aid appeal preparations. I wrote a detailed personal statement explaining my situation, gathered all the account statements I'd copied, and requested a letter from Mrs. Hargrove documenting my academic achievements and long-standing goal of attending Stanford. I also began researching trust law, learning about fiduciary responsibility and the legal obligations of trustees. What I discovered gave me both hope and anxiety. If my parents had indeed misused trust funds, there could be serious consequences. But I might also have legal recourse to recover the money intended for my education. Saturday morning, I told my parents I was meeting Zoe to study. Instead, I drove to my uncle's office downtown. He was waiting with a thick folder of legal documents. "I've reviewed everything," he said gravely as I sat across from his desk, "and I'm deeply concerned about what's happened." He showed me the trust documents, pointing out the specific language: funds to be distributed for the post-secondary education expenses of grantors' grandchildren. There was no ambiguity, no loophole that would allow the money to be used for gaming computers or cars. "How much was in the trust originally?" I asked. "Approximately $100,000, divided among 4 grandchildren. Your share was $25,000. With proper investment, it should have grown to around $40,000 by now." Almost exactly the amount that had been in my college fund before the withdrawals began. So they've been using trust money, not just their own savings? Uncle Jim nodded grimly. "It appears so. And while they have some discretion as trustees, using the money for non-educational expenses is a clear violation of the trust terms." "What can I do?" "First, we document everything. Then, we could pursue legal action to freeze the remaining funds and potentially recover misused money. Legal action against my own parents." The thought made me queasy, but what choice did I have? "If we do this," I asked, "what happens to my parents?" Uncle Jim leaned forward. "Jessica, I understand your concern. They're still your parents, and they're my family too. But they've violated their responsibility to you and to your grandparents' wishes. There should be consequences for that." We spent the next 2 hours creating a detailed timeline of withdrawals, collecting evidence, and drafting a formal letter to my parents outlining what we'd discovered and our intended next steps. The letter was firm, but offered a compromise. If they would restore the misused funds to my college account immediately, we could avoid legal proceedings. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Uncle Jim asked as I prepared to leave. "Once we send this letter, there's no going back." I thought about Stanford's palm trees, about the decade I'd spent working toward this dream, about the casual way my parents had dismissed my future in favor of my brother's. "I'm sure," I said. "They made their choice. Now I'm making mine." That evening, I sent my completed financial aid appeal to Stanford, including everything except the trust information, which we'd use only if necessary. Then I emailed a copy of our letter to my parents with a simple subject line: "We need to talk." The stage was set. I was no longer just their obedient daughter accepting whatever scraps they offered. I was fighting for what was rightfully mine. Sunday morning, I awoke to multiple missed calls and texts from both parents. I didn't respond, following Uncle Jim's advice to wait until our scheduled meeting that afternoon. He had arranged for us to meet at the office of a family lawyer friend, who specialized in trust disputes, giving our confrontation both neutral ground and professional oversight. At 2:00, I arrived at the downtown office building, stomach churning with anxiety. Uncle Jim was already there, reviewing documents, with Ms. Patel, the trust attorney. At 2:15, my parents walked in, faces tight with anger. They'd come alone. No Matthew. What is the meaning of this? My father demanded, waving a printed copy of our letter. Threatening legal action against your own parents? Have you lost your mind? Ms. Patel intervened smoothly. Mr. Riley, please have a seat. I'm Anita Patel, specializing in trust law. I've reviewed the documents concerning your parents' educational trust, and we have serious concerns about how those funds have been managed. My mother turned to Uncle Jim. You're behind this, aren't you? Turning our daughter against us? No. One turned me against you, I said quietly. Your actions did that. Ms. Patel directed everyone's attention to the documents spread across the conference table. The terms of the trust are quite clear. The funds were designated specifically for educational expenses of the grandchildren. Our documentation shows systematic withdrawals used for non-educational purposes, primarily benefiting Matthew Riley. My father's face flushed. Those were temporary reallocations. We intended to replace the funds. With what money? Uncle Jim asked. And when? Jessica starts college in 3 months. We don't answer to you about our financial decisions, my father snapped. Actually, Ms. Patel interjected, as co-trustee of your parents' educational trust, you do answer to Jim. And more importantly, you answer to the legal obligations of a trustee. She explained the potential consequences: court-ordered restoration of misused funds, removal as trustee, possibly even legal penalties for breach of fiduciary duty. My mother began to cry. We were just trying to do what was best for both our children. By stealing from one to give to the other? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Matthew needed those things, she insisted. You don't understand how hard things have been for him, always living in your shadow. We were trying to build his confidence. At the expense of my future. My father's anger seemed to deflate, replaced by a calculating look. What exactly do you want, Jessica? Ms. Patel answered for me. Full restoration of the misused trust funds to Jessica's college account immediately. The remaining trust funds to be placed under Jim's sole management as trustee. And a written agreement regarding future educational support for both children that respects the original intent of the trust. And if we refuse? Then we file a petition with the court tomorrow morning to freeze all trust assets and begin formal proceedings for breach of fiduciary duty. The threat hung in the air. My father looked at Uncle Jim, perhaps searching for a sign that this was a bluff. Finding none, he turned to me. You would do this to your own family? Create a public legal battle? What about Matthew's future? What about mine? I countered. You were willing to sacrifice my dreams without a second thought. Why should I care more about this family's reputation than you cared about my education? Just then, the conference room door burst open. Matthew stormed in, face flushed with anger. What have you done? He shouted at me. Dad just texted me what's happening. You're trying to ruin everything. Matthew, this doesn't concern you, my mother began, but he cut her off. It does concern me. She's trying to take money that was going to be for my college, too. No. I'm trying to take back money that was specifically designated for education, not for your gaming equipment or your car. He turned to our parents. You can't let her do this. You promised I could go to UCLA. In that moment, something clicked. UCLA? You already committed to a school? My parents' uncomfortable expressions confirmed it. They'd already promised to send Matthew to an expensive out-of-state university while telling me Stanford was financially impossible. When were you going to tell me this? I asked quietly. No one answered. Uncle Jim broke the silence. This isn't productive. We need a decision today. Either we reach an agreement now, or we proceed with legal action tomorrow. My father stared at the table for a long moment, then nodded slightly. What are your terms? Ms. Patel outlined the proposal. Immediate restoration of $35,000 to my college fund, transfer of trustee authority to Uncle Jim, and a binding agreement about the use of remaining trust funds for educational purposes only. "And what about Matthew's education?" my mother asked tearfully. "The remaining trust funds will be divided equally between qualified educational expenses for both children," Ms. Patel explained. "But no more cars, no more gaming equipment using these specific funds." Matthew exploded. "This is bullshit. She always gets everything she wants." "Matthew," my father snapped, "enough." For 3 hours, we negotiated. Matthew eventually stormed. "Out." My mother cried intermittently. My father oscillated between anger and resignation. But in the end, faced with the threat of legal action and public exposure, they signed the agreement. As we prepared to leave, I felt no triumph, only a hollow sadness that it had come to this. My own parents had forced me to take legal action, just to secure what was rightfully mine. Uncle Jim placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did what you had to do. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." My father overheard this and gave a bitter laugh. Proud of her for threatening her own parents? For dividing this family? "No," Uncle Jim replied calmly. "Proud of her for having the courage to fight for her future when the people who should have been protecting it failed her." My parents left without saying goodbye to me. I stayed behind with Uncle Jim and Ms. Patel to finalize the paperwork that would secure my college fund and protect it from further raids. "What happens now?" I asked as we finally prepared to leave. "Now you go to Stanford," Uncle Jim said simply. "The rest will sort itself out with time." I wasn't sure I believed him, but I had won the battle that mattered most. My dream was still alive. The legal agreement was executed within a week. True to the terms, my parents transferred $35,000 back into my college fund, now under Uncle Jim's management as trustee. Combined with my scholarships and a modest student loan, I would be able to attend Stanford after all. The emotional fallout was more complicated. My parents barely spoke to me during my final weeks at home. Matthew alternated between cold silence and cutting remarks. The tension was suffocating, making me count the days until I could leave for California. Stanford's financial aid office approved my appeal, offering an additional grant that further reduced my loan burden. Mrs. Delgado called personally to inform me. "We're impressed by your advocacy for yourself," she told me. "That kind of determination will serve you well here." In August, when it came time to move into my dorm, my parents offered a perfunctory, "We'll drive you to the airport." I declined. "Uncle Jim and Zoe are taking me," I said. "Thanks anyway." The morning I left, my mother attempted a tearful reconciliation at my bedroom door. "We only wanted what was best for everyone." "No," I corrected her gently. "You wanted what was best for Matthew, even if it came at my expense. There's a difference." My father remained in his office, emerging only to give me a stiff nod as I carried my suitcases to Uncle Jim's waiting car. Matthew didn't even come out of his room. The campus was everything I'd dreamed of: Spanish architecture, swaying palm trees, brilliant blue skies. As Uncle Jim and Zoe helped me unpack in my tiny dorm room, I felt the weight of the past months begin to lift. "You did it?" Zoe said, hugging me fiercely before she left. "You actually did it." "Call me anytime," Uncle Jim added, "day or night. And remember, you earned this." Those first weeks were a whirlwind of classes, orientation activities, and new friendships. I threw myself into campus life, joining the debate society, volunteering at a local literacy program, and forming study groups with my classmates. The academic challenges were exactly what I'd hoped for: demanding, stimulating, occasionally overwhelming, but always rewarding. When Thanksgiving approached, I received a text from my mother. "We expect you home for the holiday. Dad will send a ticket." I stared at my phone for a long time before responding. "I'm staying on campus this break, catching up on work." It wasn't entirely untrue. I had papers to write and midterms to study for. But mostly, I couldn't face the thought of returning to that house, to the tension and resentment that awaited me there. Instead, I joined a Friendsgiving organized by the dorm for students who weren't traveling home. We cooked together in the communal kitchen, laughed over burnt rolls and lumpy gravy, and shared what we were thankful for. When my turn came, I said simply, "I'm thankful for second chances, and for the courage to fight for them." Christmas was harder. Uncle Jim flew out to California, and we spent the holiday at a beachfront hotel in Santa Monica. He brought me a small gift from my mother, a Stanford photo frame with my acceptance letter inside. No gift from my father or Matthew. "They'll come around," Uncle Jim assured me as we walked along the beach on Christmas morning. "Your father is stubborn, but he's not heartless, and your mother misses you terribly." "I'm not sure I'm ready to forgive them," I admitted. "You don't have to be ready yet. Healing takes time." When second semester began, I received an unexpected email from my mother, hesitant but warm, asking about my classes and new friends. I responded cautiously, sharing surface details but keeping my deeper thoughts private. A correspondence began, stilted at first, then gradually more natural. By March, we were exchanging weekly updates. My father took longer. In April, he sent a brief email congratulating me on making the dean's list. I thanked him politely. 2 weeks later, he called, our first real conversation since the confrontation. "Your mother says you're doing well," he began awkwardly. "I am. Stanford is everything I hoped it would be." A long pause. "I may have been hasty in my judgment about your school choice." It wasn't quite an apology, but from my father, it was significant. "Thank you for saying that." Another pause. "Jim tells me you've been offered a summer internship at a literacy foundation." "Yes, working with underprivileged children in East Palo Alto." That's good work, Jessica. Important work." The conversation remained somewhat formal, but it was a start. My relationship with Matthew remained fractured, though my mother reported he was doing well at UCLA. I sent him a birthday card in May. He didn't respond. As my freshman year drew to a close, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal still hurt, but it no longer defined me. I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed: determination, courage, the ability to advocate for myself even when it was painful. My experience also gave me a new purpose. I began working with the financial aid office as a peer counselor, helping other students navigate the complex world of college financing. I shared my story selectively, using it to help those facing similar challenges with family support. "You don't have to accept defeat," I would tell them. "There are always options if you're willing to fight for your education." By the start of sophomore year, I had established clearer boundaries with my family. I returned home for brief visits, maintaining a cordial relationship while protecting my independence. My mother made efforts to repair our relationship. My father acknowledged in his own way that he had been wrong. Matthew remained distant, but no longer openly hostile. Uncle Jim remained my most steadfast supporter, offering both emotional and practical guidance as I navigated college life. "Your grandparents would be so proud," he told me during one of our regular phone calls, "not just of your achievements, but of your integrity." That meant more to me than any academic award. 3 years later, as I prepare to graduate with honors, I can look back on that painful time with perspective. My parents' betrayal taught me harsh but valuable lessons, that sometimes you must fight for what's rightfully yours, that family dynamics can be complicated and unfair, and that standing up for yourself doesn't mean you don't love your family. It means you also love yourself. The college fund drama didn't define me, but it shaped me. It forced me to advocate for myself, to seek help when needed, and to recognize that I had the power to change my circumstances rather than simply accepting them. These lessons served me well throughout college and will continue to guide me as I move into the professional world. My relationship with my family has healed somewhat, though it will never be what it once was. My parents attended my junior year parents' weekend, awkward but trying. Matthew and I exchange occasional texts, finding our way toward a new kind of sibling relationship based on adult choices rather than childhood dynamics. As for Stanford, it has been everything I dreamed of and worked for. Every palm tree, every Spanish archway, every challenging class reminds me that some dreams are worth fighting for, even when the fight comes at a personal cost. If you're facing your own battle for education or opportunity, remember this: no one can take your future unless you let them. Stand firm, seek allies, know your rights, and never stop advocating for yourself. The path may not be what you expected, but with determination and courage, you can find your way to where you're meant to be. Have you ever had to stand up to family for something that was rightfully yours? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about overcoming obstacles and finding your own path. Remember, sometimes the greatest act of love is believing in yourself when others don't. Thank you for listening to my journey.